In this lesson, we will be taking another look at the center of the chessboard and piece activity. In the video on opening principles, I introduced the importance of the center. Here we will take another look at this key strategic element of the game. Virtually all of chess strategy can be reduced to piece mobility and piece activity. That is, to the ability of the pieces to fulfill their duties, which is to defend, attack, and capture, or to prepare to do those things. I explained how the pieces experience their maximum mobility at, through, or near the center. From the center area, the pieces can more quickly attack or defend anywhere on the board, either the queen side or king side, or up the center. So your first strategic aim is to try to control the center, or at least prevent your opponent from doing the same. Whoever can safely control the center movement of pawns and pieces has the upper hand. There is a maximum in chess which states that you cannot launch a flank attack, that is, an attack which takes place on the queen side or king side, unless you are also able to contain your opponent's play in the center. This is why your opening moves should focus on the center. Novices who are unaware of this chess precept sometimes develop the wing pawns in the hope of bringing their rooks quickly into play, but this usually fails against a more experienced player who develops towards the center, quickly castles, and then punishes his opponent's inferior piece placement. Since dominating the center has shown to give the upper hand, virtually every central pawn move and moves with pieces which challenge those pawns have been tried, and they have all been cataloged and codified in massive encyclopedias of chess openings. In fact, professional chess players memorize the best opening moves in countless variations, almost all of which impact the center in one way or another. Some chess openings are very aggressive, while others develop more slowly. In this first game, we see a rapid assault against the enemy king. Okay, white opens with pawn to e4, which is one of the central squares. The sweet center is e4, d4, e5, and d5. And black, in turn, places a pawn on e5, and white brings out his knight towards the center. And look, we have our first threat. This pawn is being attacked and there are no defenders. So black defends it by bringing this knight out. And of course, our goal is to castle. And white develops his bishop to c4. And you notice it's attacking this pawn here, the f7 pawn. And now white is actually free to castle. And the bishop in turn comes to c5, also attacking this pawn. And white prepares an attack actually in the center by playing pawn to c3. And if you notice on the next move, he can play pawn to d4, which will attack the bishop, the little guy harassing big guy, which I mentioned in my book. And black develops his knight to f6, noticing he's attacking this pawn. But white is one step ahead. He has a time advantage, as I mentioned in the time section. And he attacks the bishop, and the pawn takes, and now the bishop is again attacked. And he actually runs back here. Notice now that white has the classic center. It's called the classic center. He's got a pawn on e4 and on d4. This is like the ideal dream position, especially since these pawns are in reach of enemy pieces. And white takes advantage of it by immediately attacking the knight. And the knight has to run. And he attacks the second knight. Here they come. They're marching down the board towards the enemy king. The knight, your best defense is a good offense. So the knight swings in, and now notice now he's got two attackers on this pawn. But white ignores this because he says, my attack is better than yours. So he again pushes the pawn and attacks the knight. Pawn takes, the knight is still attacked. And now black desperately is trying to create some counterplay, takes the pawn. There are other moves here, of course, and they all fail, but we'll just look at what was played in this game. Now the queen is under attack, and the queen runs while at the same time developing an attack against this f7 pawn, which would be pretty devastating because it would be a check. And black takes the rook, white captures the pawn with check. The king only has one square to run to, and now the bishop comes and pins the knight, and the game is over because the queen will be lost. Because the queen will be lost in the next move, or it will be checkmate. So for example, whatever he tries, look, the queen can't run because the queen will actually be lost on the next move, even if black is able to prevent the checkmate, maybe by moving this pawn here. White is one step ahead and checks the king this way, or he could actually check the king with the pawn and still win the queen this way. The queen would take and the bishop would take with check, and then the king takes. But white has won a queen and the game over. So in this game you could see how developing a quick pawn center can overrun your opponent. Now in the next game we're going to be looking at a more modern approach to the center, which is more slow and careful build-up. In this game, white opens with the knight instead of a pawn, and the knight actually defends and attacks center squares as well, so this is an acceptable move. And black does the same thing in turn. And notice now that white is planning to bring the bishop to the g2 square, and it will influence the center from a distance. So now you can see the bishop is attacking everything on this diagonal, and this is a modern way of approaching the center. And black develops, he moves a pawn to get the bishop out in preparation for castling, and white castles, bishop comes to e7. So you notice in this game how there is no rapid engagement of pawns or pieces. They're going to have a slow build-up, get everything into play before they try to engage each other. It's a much more complicated game. And pawn to d3. Even I don't know what's going on here, folks, but this is fairly common type of opening in modern professional chess. But you can see how they are building up and impacting the center, right? So notice now that this pawn is free to move to e4 if he wants. It's an option. They're keeping their options open and waiting for a mistake by their opponent. Okay, so he does play pawn to e4. Knight develops, and rook slides over, gets into play here in case this file opens up. So anyway, I just want to show you a different approach to a rapid approach, and both styles are still played to this day. It's just your choice, and you might play one variation in one opening and a different one in another opening, depending on your mood or the opponent you're playing. So there's another type of center that can materialize, and that's where the center gets locked up, where pawns can no longer move. So let's take a look at that. Okay, in this game, white opens with pawn to d4, and black responds with pawn to c6. So this is another option. I don't recommend it for inexperienced players. You should really push the pawn all the way to d5, really establish your own pawn in the center. But there's still some flexibility here, and white and black rather can still push pawns towards the center. And white now grabs the c4 square with the pawn here, defending the d5 square a little bit. And we continue. See, black is being really laid back and keeping all of his options open. Again, like I said, you run the risk of getting very cramped against an experienced player, but it really all depends on the skill levels of the opponents. Okay, so white continues with knight to c3, and black pulls the queen out, pawn to e4. I just want to show you how centers can get locked up. And now white pushes here, and black now plays pawn to c5. Now notice how these pawns in the center are completely locked up. They can't capture each other. It'd be very difficult to break the center up. So play now won't take place in the center immediately, or maybe never, and play will take place either on the king side or the queen side. And the game will be a race to see who can attack the enemy king first. and that's what typically happens when the center gets locked up. And I just wanted to show you the three types of approaches to the center. There are literally over 1,000 named opening variations. And listen to these mind-boggling numbers. There are 400 different possible positions after each player makes just one move apiece. After two moves, it becomes 72,000, over 72,000 positions. There are over 9 million positions after 3 moves apiece. There are over 288 billion different possible positions after 4 moves. There are more 40-move games than the number of electrons in our universe. There are more game trees of chess than the number of galaxies, over 100 billion, and more openings, defenses, gambits than the number of quarks in our universe, which is why chess can fascinate for a lifetime or many lifetimes. This also underscores the importance of knowing general principles to guide your play, while at the same time determining the exact particular threats which your opponent is trying to make against you, and those you can make against your opponent. So follow the age-old advice for opening play by developing at least one pawn in the center. Now proceed to the 5th lesson on pawn structure, which is also the last lesson of this chess strategy for beginners course.